Bill, you want to start?
Sure, we'll kick it off.
Okay.
I'd like to welcome everyone to our second meeting of the 2021 school year. And tonight we have a special guest speaker, Robert J. Vecchio. And Dr. Lutz, would you like to introduce Robert?
Absolutely.
Oh, we need the Pledge of Allegiance, I'm sorry.
Yeah, we are well prepared for our pledge. You gonna pledge, Bill, or you want me to?
Yeah, oh, I'm sorry. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I was waiting for the recording. So, all these meetings.
I know. Yeah, I was kind of waiting for music, actually. Anyway.
Sorry about that. All right.
Wasn't you. So I am so glad to have Bob Vecchio, or Robert J. Vecchio, as Bill said, to come and speak. For those of you who have not had the really privilege of being a guest on his radio show, or seeing him at some of the many events that he's at, he's actually really easy to listen to, full of amazing information about public education. But let me just tell you a little bit, because really his work in public education is not his full-time work, although I'm thinking he spends lots and lots of hours doing it. But he actually works presently for Seafield Center, which is a drug and alcohol treatment center based in West Hampton Beach. He's been there since 1991. Rose through the ranks to become the company's controller and oversees the financial operations of that company. Seafield has a 100-bed inpatient facility in West Hampton Beach and 5 outpatient locations across Long Island. It has been recognized as one of the leaders in providing high-quality treatment for substance use disorders. And I certainly think in this pandemic time, they have seen their challenges, because we know that that has certainly increased the challenges with all of the anxiety and everything else going on. Use and abuse of drugs and alcohol has increased. Bob is also very heavily involved in his community. In 2003, he was elected a trustee of the William Floyd Board of Education. 2006, he was elected its president and still holds that position today. In 2007, under Mr. Vecchio's leadership, William Floyd High School was the first high school in New York State to have an OASIS licensed clinic housed on their campus for services for adolescents, which is just a huge service, important service for high school age students. This program is currently operated by Family Service League. In May 2015, Mr. Vecchio was recognized by the New York State School Boards Association by receiving their first ever Champion for Change Award, which recognized his outstanding school board service and leadership statewide. He also has been awarded the Distinguished Service Award by the Nassau-Suffolk School Boards Association, which he's very involved with. He's been recognized numerous times for his outstanding leadership in the community by multiple local community organizations. He is co-chairperson of the Brookhaven, New York chapter of Our Community Salutes, a national non-for-profit that annually recognizes graduating high school seniors who are enlisting into the nation's armed forces. Since 2016, Bob has hosted a weekly radio show titled Spotlight on Long Island Schools on 103.9 FM, Long Island News Radio, a JVC broadcasting station. Mr. Vecchio is also a trustee for his local church, which is St. Jude's Roman Catholic Church, located in Mastic Beach. Bob, I just have to say, you are incredibly gracious to public schools across Long Island with your work on that radio show. You have hosted Eastern Suffolk BOCES programs, many programs. You do that every year. We're very appreciative of really your efforts just to get out the good news about public education. You know, it's not a lot of news outlets that are looking to get out good news about public education. And although it's not in your bio, I know you well enough to know that you are a fierce advocate for public education, particularly inequities in funding. Um, if there's an advocacy event about public education on Long Island or in Albany, you are there. So I thank you for that work. So happy to have you here. I did have the opportunity to talk to Bob a little bit about this committee and really the purposes of this committee, and really, Bill, about one of your goals with this committee is to help people understand not only the importance of advocating, but really how to go about doing that. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Bob, to share your wisdom, and then we'll open it up to some Q&A.
Great, and well, the bio, I'm gonna have to pare that down. That's way too much. My wife will tell you I still forget to take out the garbage on Tuesday nights. So, yeah, listen, public education has always been a spot very close to my heart. Very early on, I think we've been very fortunate on Long Island to have really good public schools for a very long time. But there are some challenges. And when I moved into the William Floyd community in 1991, I started attending school board meetings, I'm going to say 1999. Actually, the first issue that made me come out to say, hey, what's going on with my school district was E-rate funding, because I had seen a list of schools that were getting E-rate funding when it first came out, and William Floyd wasn't listed there, and I wanted to know why. And then, of course, I just started attending for several years. And then finally in 2003, I decided to run, and was fortunate enough and humble enough to be elected to that post by my community. And I've been reelected every time since. It's 3-year terms. And, once you think you know something about public education, because everybody's an expert because we all went to school, and then you think you know what's going on in your community with your school district, but until you get to that board table and you start to learn really what is happening, it's an education all onto itself. And I know there are several school board members here that are participating tonight, and they will attest to the fact that, a lot of folks will say it's a thankless job, but it's not thankless. We get paid in full every June, sitting on that stage when we get to see the kids cross the stage. And some of us are fortunate enough that I'm more than paid in full. I got to hand my 2 kids their diplomas, and listen, for all the hours and all the sacrifice that we make to have that special moment that many folks don't get to have. I'm more than paid in full. But advocacy is a huge part of what we do, and there's different stakeholder groups that we're advocating for. And I'll get to the radio show in a little bit, but very early on in my tenure at William Floyd, I came in during some very tumultuous times for public education as far as the integrity of our system, because we had some financial scandals going on Long Island with Rosalind, and William Floyd had its own, and I had come in right as that was unfolding and unraveling. And, a lot of people were telling me, well, you weren't there when it all happened, just blame everybody and, politically, play it safe and, make sure you isolate yourself. But I knew early on that wouldn't do any good for the 9,000 kids that we serve. And I knew that we had to do the work of restoring credibility and trust within our community. So my first steps of advocacy were local. It wasn't with the state officials or the federal officials. It was making sure we didn't lose a budget, making sure that we maintained stability on our Board of Education. So my advocacy was really with my neighbors, the most important stakeholders that we have, because they affirm what you do or don't do every May. And we had to go out into the community and make sure that we communicated what happened, made no excuses for it, but more importantly, what we were doing to correct it. And so the advocacy really began very local, going to civic meetings, having coffee clutches with people. I would go to somebody's house and speak to 5 or 6 people, but I knew we had to get out there, and never once would I blame the other board. I would go with, incumbent board members, because we had to be unified. And I'm proud to say we never lost the budget, and we never lost a trustee seat in those immediate years following the issues that we had. And, it's the advocacy that we did locally as a team that really paid off dividends. But it taught me a very, very important lesson early on. One, you could be 0 to 0 in a heartbeat. So don't believe your own hype, because Yeah, they'll praise you one day and kick you in the teeth the next. And usually when you start believing your own hype is when you get in trouble. Trust and always verify, and always remember who your audience is. So as I grew in my role as a trustee, now the inequities in education, there is a difference in education throughout New York State, throughout this country, really, depending on the zip code that you live in. I happen to be from a high needs, low wealth school district, fourth poorest on Long Island by all the state indicators. 65% of our kids are free or reduced lunch. We have over 300 kids classified homeless. So we are a very challenged socioeconomic district. Wasn't going to let that be excuses as to why we weren't performing where we should be. When I became board president in '07, our graduation rate, after the state changed how they track graduation rates to the cohort methodology, our graduation rate was reported at 62%. Me and then the new appointed superintendent, Dr. Paul Casciano, said unacceptable. We got to move the needle. We got to move it fast, and it's tough to move a system, but we were failing too many of our kids. And that had nothing to do with the lack of funding coming from the state or the feds or some of the laws that were impacting us. We just had to do better. We had to acknowledge we had to do better. And I'm proud to say this past August, with our August graduation numbers in there, we're at 90%. And that's an incredible growth that I am extremely proud of. And that takes a lot of advocacy to move from 62% to 90% with the socioeconomic challenges that we have. But advocacy is always extremely, extremely important, because I have an expression that I tell new board members all the time. I'd rather have a seat at the table than be an item on the menu. And if you're not out there advocating all the time, not just budget season, 12 months a year, you're not going to be remembered. You may become an item on the menu because you don't have a seat at the table. When you keep showing up to events, when you keep having civil conversations with the policymakers and those in the state and the federal arenas that could impact your funding, could impact the way you spend your money due to new laws, you should be a known entity to them, and they should know your story. And that takes work, and you have to be passionate about it. But you have to know your facts. Don't try to spin facts to suit some sort of story. Just lay out your facts the way they are. Don't go in accusing. Go in trying to work in collaboration. Advocacy is such a strong part. And if your policymakers know your story and know your story well, it can help out in certain situations. I'll tell you a story that it was relayed to me just recently. And I'm not going to get into any political conversations or political arguments. It's just, you deal with those who are in office, right? They hold the office, so you got to work with them. Our current congressman from the William Floyd area also happens to be a William Floyd alumni, Congressman Lee Zeldin. And there were certain federal issues and federal laws that were being bandied about recently, and more importantly, this federal stimulus bill that we're all advocating for funding for education. He wanted to know specific items and specific data on what was happening at William Floyd. And the reason he wanted to know that is because of who he is and the party he's affiliated with. He's got a direct line to the White House and the administration of the White House. And what Congressman Zeldin did as a state senator, he still does as a congressman. He takes the local story and tells the story to those at the table when he's at the table. And in this case, at the table in the White House, talking to the Trump administration about why the funding is necessary and how it's impacting the school he went to, the school his children still go to. But again, that takes advocacy to make sure he knows that story just as well as I know our story. So our story, the William Floyd story, currently with what we're experiencing, has been discussed at the White House, and that's advocacy. But that takes years of building a relationship, building trust with those policymakers. Congressman Zeldin and I haven't always seen eye to eye, and we've had plenty of respectful disagreements, if you will, and some healthy discourse over some of the things that he's done or not done. But there's always been a level of respect and trust. I've never blown him up in public. And I tell another story. Senator Monica Martinez, she represents the 3rd District. I was actively supporting her opponent. So after she won, we sent her an invite for her to come to our school to get to know William Floyd, because again, seat at the table, not an item on the menu. First thing I told her, I said, I'm Bob Vecchio, I'm the board president. I want to let you know I supported your opponent, but you are my senator. And if you're not successful, we're not successful. So I'm here to work with you. And that's the way it should be. Differing parties still coming together, because you know what? There's no Republican way or Democratic way when it comes to public education. There's the right way and the wrong way. And I always say at William Floyd, we've got 9,000 reasons why we got to do it the right way. So advocacy is a strong part of what we do as board members, but I still keep it local. I have a page, a Facebook page, and sometimes it's a double-edged sword, but for the most part, it's called Voices for Floyd. It's not a school district page. It's a page that I do. But I'm constantly getting our talking points out there. I'm constantly reprinting articles that the New York State School Board Association sends out to us about what's happening around other areas of the state. I'm always talking about inequity in funding, high needs districts, and how cuts impact them more, and the differences on Long Island with regional cost differences. Some of my own residents know my talking points just as well as I do. And that is so important, to have your stakeholders know your story, know your needs, and know your advocacy points just as much as you do. Because guess what? When a state official shows up to a local civic meeting, and maybe I'm not there, there's a resident there that follows and has bought in and is advocating for us on our behalf. There's nothing better than that, because they always hear from me. But when they hear residents saying the same thing, it carries a lot of weight. So advocacy always starts locally. Finally, with the radio station, and I'll finish on this. I was always being called into the morning show on the radio station to talk about educational issues. Because like Julie says, I'm a guy, when I'm all in, I'm all over the place. And so somebody at the radio station was like, oh, we see this guy's name quoted in a newspaper, let's get him on. So they kept calling me to come on their morning show anytime there was talk about education. So finally I was like, you only call me when there's an issue, budget season, and we got to talk about taxes, or maybe there's some controversy out there and you want the school district perspective, because, it's always in the negative light. I said, I've got a great idea for a show. How about I bring in some students and I bring in teachers and talk about the great things that they're doing? Because as a board member, I get a front row seat to all the great things that happen in my school. And I realized early on, a lot of our residents don't even know all the great program. Eastern Suffolk BOCES, I could do a half a year of shows with all the things that they do. And same thing with Western Suffolk BOCES and Nassau BOCES. I've had them in. This isn't school as I remember it, much less there's a misconception as to what we do or don't do. So I was like, I have a great idea. You guys can learn about all the great things that are happening in schools, and you're going to hear it from the kids and the faculty that are doing it. And my conversation was with the owner of the radio station, and he was a little skeptical at first, because he was like, yeah, I want to see where all my tax money is going and what I'm spending my money on, and see if I'm getting a return on investment. So he gave the show a shot. He gave us a half hour on a Saturday, and they have these different, what they call lifestyle shows on LI News Radio on the weekends. And this show, since 2016, is the most popular show that either gets, listened to, downloaded, reprinted, or whatever. It's one of their most popular shows on the weekends that people tune into, because there's nothing better than a young student talking passionately about a program they're involved in. And the show never gets old, it never gets dull, because kids and educators are the most passionate people that I've ever encountered. I'm not an educator myself. Like I said, I handle the accounting for a healthcare company. So my normal paying life, my paying gig, as I call it, is kind of boring. It's numbers and spreadsheets and budgets. But to hear a student talk about a unique program that they're involved in and what they're learning from it, it's always a great story. And it's always such, from an interviewer standpoint, it's an easy interview. You bring on the educators like Dr. Lutz and some board members. I know Fred Langstaff is out there, has been on my show, Kathy Romano, and you bring in some of the educators and the kids. It's just, I learn something all the time. I always get really nervous with the science kids that have won the Regeneron stuff, because they talk at a level I don't even know how to follow up with a question. But it's a great show. And more importantly, it's free advertising for PR, but it's advocacy. It's advocacy for every district that comes on, because they get a copy of the show, they get to put it on their website, and then they go back locally to their communities and say, this is what was on the air. This is what we talked about. So the show, as I see it as a marketing PR vehicle, it's also advocacy. And it was out of advocacy that the show was born. And thank God, they still give us that venue I'm not required to sell commercials to sell the show or anything. But they know it's a hit, and that's why they keep it on. So again, it's something I've been long passionate about, public education, because I believe if you really want to change somebody's life trajectory, particularly in socioeconomically challenged districts like mine, there's no better vehicle to do that than public education. And I always think of the one kid who was a valedictorian of our school district one year. He was one of 6 kids. Dad was a carpet layer. Mom was a stay-at-home mom. So their means weren't a lot. And this kid was so bright, latched onto our educational system, latched onto our educators who opened the doors for them. He got a free ride to MIT. He's long since graduated. You think his lifestyle has changed compared to what he grew up on? It absolutely did. And it elevated his family, his siblings, based on his model, based on what he showed is possible, have also aspired to higher levels. And that's how you raise all the boats. So that's why I believe in what we do. I'm passionate about what we do. And I've encountered so many great people along the way. I've learned so much along the way. And that's why I do it. You're on mute, Julie.
I was trying to keep the cat noise down. And listening to what you shared, I remember when Lee Zeldin first became a New York State Senator, you invited him in, and you invited some experts in public education in. We met over, I think, where the board meets in Floyd, and took the opportunity to educate him about public education and the funding of public education. And I think very often, people new to advocacy make these assumptions that lawmakers know this stuff. And, and I think, a good sign in a lawmaker is when they pause to actually listen and want to learn. And the other thing that you said about Monica Martinez, your comments to her when you met her, we've had her on in this committee. And one of the things that I am fairly certain she said when she came is, once you're in office, she said, I don't work for the Republicans or the Democrats. I work for all of my constituents.
Mm-hmm.
It is not about a party once you're in office. So I thank you for being a great role model as to how to advocate in a way that's respectful and in a way where you understand the need to educate people on the truth of the issues so that they can make better decisions. So
thank you.
Appreciate that. So if people have questions for Bob, and I know some of our board members who are definitely going to have questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A or in the chat. And we will share them. So Ryan,
too quick.
And I know, trust Mrs. Romano is formulating her question as we.
She's going to try to stump me. Mrs. Romano and I had a really great conversation the first time I ever met her coming back from Washington, D.C. and talk about a great advocate for public education, her and Fred and Bill Miller and your board members, are fantastic. And it was the quickest ride from DC to New York I've ever had in my life. Then not so much because of her speed, but because of the conversation and the passionate and the difference of ideas. And, lots of times me and Ms. Romano, we're on opposite sides of the spectrum, but we come to consensus when it comes to doing the right thing for kids. So,
yeah. So you know what? So let me ask you, let me just look. Oh, we have a question. Dr. Stephen Gessner from, who's also active in New York State school boards, and he's on our board. He represents Shelter Island. So he says he's interested in your views of the NYSBA onboard newspaper, recent point, counterpoint articles on racism.
On racism, yeah. I think that's an important conversation that they are definitely spearheading, and diversity has long been a priority of NYSBA's, and I know that because Fred Langstaff, longtime area director, current president, has talked about that. It's an important conversation to have. It's sometimes it's that uncomfortable conversation around the Thanksgiving table, but it's an important one to have. And Julie, you and I recently did a show where we were talking about diversity and equity in education, and it's a conversation that needs to continue. And again, that's the advocacy point too, that you have to know your audience, know your community, and know what you're hearing. And I'll share this, we had some of the Black Lives Matter protests locally in our community. And, one of the things that we were concerned about is our school district is named after William Floyd, the only person from Long Island to sign the Declaration of Independence. And like so many people in the day, yes, he owned slaves. So our big concern was, well, are they going to ask us to rename the school? There was a big to-do about removing his statue that's stands at the corner of Montauk Highway and William Floyd Parkway. And it's not so much about the statue as it is about the conversation that needs to be had. And I know at William Floyd, we took diversity very seriously back in 07, 08, because we were looking at our student body and we were looking at our educators and our administrators, and those faces weren't really aligned. And Dr. Casciano, along with the board, made a conscientious effort to kind of open the doors and look internally to see what we were doing that might have been prohibiting attracting candidates to our school that would better reflect our student body. And we've done a better job with that. And we've gotten some very, very good, talented folks in on all sides and all levels of our primary and secondary level. But you had to look inward. What were you doing that you weren't getting candidates? Because there's a lot of qualified people. So I think NYSBA has always been out on the forefront with that, as far as having the conversation and even taking steps and actions that they've done individually, to address that. A lot of their conferences and webinars have been centered around that long before the current unrest that we've seen. So it's, so I'm glad to be part of that. Hope that answered the question.
Yeah. So Kathy Romano wrote this. What is Floyd preparing for with lack of COVID aid?
Yeah. So, well, we were just talking the other day how we have just kind of recovered from the Great Recession of 08, 09, and 9, 10, and now this. And, the August payment was short by about $900,000, and on a $254 billion million dollar budget, it doesn't sound like a lot, but it is a lot. And, the investment we've had to make in technology, and we're still behind the 8 ball on that. We don't have a device for every student that we have. We don't have a device to meet the demand of what we have out there. And we had to reshift and reallocate resources. We were just talking recently about we're on a hybrid model K through 12, and it's not working. It's just not enough for our kids. We got to find a way to get our kids in the classroom more. And we're having those conversations, and those conversations always have financial implications. And, well, what are we going to have to do to address the here and now with an eye towards the future that we may lose more if mid-year cuts become a reality, if the stimulus package doesn't come through? I'm pretty confident, based on conversations I've had with Congressman Zeldin and based on what you're seeing, that there's going to be funding for schools, for education. And because what I've heard is there's a lot of agreement on the funding for schools in the federal stimulus package. It's the differences that they have is with the local government fundings and some of the other extras, but there's a strong consensus on education and the education funding dollars. And to quote Lee Zeldin, and I'm not quoting him out of turn, he said this during an education advisory committee meeting, there's going to be a ton of money for education. And that's where he relayed the Floyd story that he brought to the White House. So I worry more about 21, 22, because like we experienced with IRA, if they fill the gap for 1 year, they're not going to fill it for 2 years. And then what do we do? So what are we doing to prepare? Well, one of the things that we did this budget cycle was we actually reduced our budget by $5 million. And we still went out with a tax rate increase that was below our cap, but we built in a cushion. And prior to this adjustment that we're going to be making regarding our hybrid setting, we said, okay, if we get a cut of about $7 million in state aid, which isn't even closer to 20%, but if it's $7 million, we'll be okay. If it gets up to about 9, we could probably still be okay. If it's above 9, then we're going to really have some problems with layoffs and reductions mid-year, and then it becomes draconian for us. So we were very proactive in the budget cycle that we are currently in last year, trying to read the tea leaves and trying to build a cushion. And if the cut never came this year, then we're going to be positioned for the next year. So what did we do in preparation of that? We really tightened the belt a little bit, and we don't really have a lot of belt to tighten to begin with, but we did certain things. One of the things that we did years ago was we got very smart after 08, 09, and 9, 10, where we negotiated our contracts in a way that there's no guaranteed raises with our staff. We built in language, we call it revenue-driven language, where it promises them 0 as a floor and then a certain percentage as a ceiling, because with the tax cap environment, we knew we had to change something, because I found it crazy that I was negotiating and offering things to negotiate zeros with the unions to preserve jobs. I was like, this is nuts. So in a nutshell, Reader's Digest version, our raises for our staff are tied to the new revenue that we get, either through property taxes or state aid. And if we have cuts or we have flat aid, that automatically levels the increases at 0. I don't have to negotiate it. The economics is kind of taken off the table, and it's preserved jobs. It has preserved jobs, and it's put us, we're not promising expenses beyond what we can predict we're going to get. And it's fair, because if I get it, they're getting it. If I don't get it, they share in that, but they're not going to make less than they were making the year before. What we did this year too, we had a great conversation with all of our bargaining units. We said, look, we don't know if we're going to get cuts. We're kind of thinking we're going to get cuts based on what the governor has said. So you know what? Almost like a balanced billing type of thing. Salaries were frozen from the superintendent all the way to all the bargaining units. Salaries are frozen. Salaries and steps too, by the way, for the professionals in the group. So if we get the cuts, they're not going to be harmed because they've already made the sacrifice. If we don't get the cuts, we're going to catch up with them at the end of the year. So almost like PSE&G, you're going to pay a certain amount every year, and then you balance bill at the end of it. So again, getting back to advocacy, there's a great amount of trust and advocacy with your stakeholder groups. And in this case, the stakeholder groups being our bargaining units, that they trust us enough to work with us in a collaborative way to protect and preserve programs for our kids. And that's a success story. So to answer Kathy's question in a very long way, that's one of the things that we did that has helped us not have to make cuts like we've seen in other school districts across New York State, whether it be Schenectady or Copeg or Brentwood, right? So I'm grateful for that. And hopefully we don't get those cuts because it's going to take a long time to recover.
So I have a question. What would you say is the most interesting story or guest that you've had on the radio show?
Wow. There's been so many. I think you had mentioned in my bio, I run an event called Our Community Salutes, and I always invite folks to check that organization out. Our Community Salutes locally at the William Floyd area, and we recognize kids that are enlisting into the military, not kids appointed to the academy, kids who have enlisted into the military from William Floyd, Pat Med, South Country, Center Moriches, Eastport, South Manor, and I'm leaving off one, but definitely those districts, and I'll think of the other one. And the reason we did that was we have a very active NJROTC program, thanks to Eastern Suffolk BOCES, and it's a program we're extremely proud of. And we always have a high number of recruits, not necessarily because of that program, but it certainly doesn't hurt. Well, one of our kids who actually graduated a year before my son, he was very active in the NJROTC, and my son was as well, wound up enlisting into the Marines, and tragically was killed in a car accident outside of boot camp. And I remember his funeral and people saying, wow, thank you for Nick's service. Thank you for Nick's service. And I was like, wow, we should have thanked Nick before he went. And that's the premise of our community salutes, was we thank them for their service before they go, because some of these kids aren't coming back, or they're not coming back the same in today's world. And at any moment, at any given moment, they could be halfway across the world dealing with some conflict that, who knows? So our community salutes was born because of that. So we did a radio show a couple years after we started this with a kid and his parents who enlisted into the Army. We had the recruiter, we had mom and dad, and we had the enlistee. And we were about a month removed from our annual event. And Fred Langstaff has been at the event. It's standing room only. Every elected official under the sun comes out for this. We had rear admirals, 2-star generals. It's a big to-do. All the active duty personnel in there dress blues, and it's an impressive event. Of all the things I'm involved in, this is one of the things that always chokes me up in the middle of the night. So I'm doing a radio show with one of the kids that we had honored just a few months earlier. And it was the reaction of his dad. It's still getting me. His dad was so grateful for that night, because he could not articulate how proud he was of his son enlisting. And it was that night that he was able to tell his son just how proud he was. And his dad choked up on the air. You can hear it in my voice. I'm getting choked up as I'm talking about it. So it's, you're involved in something, you do something, you don't realize the impact that you have until you get, to have the privilege of seeing it firsthand like that is pretty cool. And so of all the shows, and there's been a lot of wow moments, that one really gets to me. And then I did another show with a young lady who was received a scholarship, and I'm going to say it was from Central Islip School District. And her life, based on the scholarship that she received, is going to be changed forever. And her mom crying in our studio because she knew the gravity of what public education did for her daughter out of another high needs district, another area where kids either flourish or sometimes, they don't. But it's shows like that just get you all the time. But yeah, so I guess those two kind of stand out for me. And I guess based on my retelling of the father, just as a dad, it kind of gets to you.
Yeah, those are great stories. Right, and stories that wouldn't typically make it into Newsday, right?
No, it doesn't fit the narrative, right? Some program like that, and you think about, and the reason we do our community salutes is because there's a national statistic out there that 60% of today's high school seniors, almost 70%, are not eligible to serve. They don't qualify for a multitude of reasons. Almost 70% of the kids aren't eligible to serve. And of the remaining 30 to 35%, 1% sign up. So we always do a big deal because we always say it's a special 1%. So enough of that.
All right. So another question. What's been your biggest challenge as a board member?
The funding and equity. I've got a very supportive community. I'm very, very lucky with my board members. I've served with some great boards. We've never had the friction, the division, the divisiveness. We've always, even during our darkest times, we were always unified. But my biggest challenge as a board member is doing more with less. And I'm tired of doing more with less. I'm tired of getting shortchanged and being told, well, too bad. If the state funded education the way they're supposed to, I would have been at 90% graduation rate probably 6 years ago. and that many more kids would have been that more successful that's much sooner. So that's been my biggest challenge. That's been my biggest frustration, that this state, and they're not alone, you read about it in other states, but a person's education shouldn't be dictated, not their public education should not be dictated based on their zip code. As a board member, I see it firsthand in my district. I see it statewide, and it's just wrong, because every kid deserves that shot of that kid that got the full ride to MIT and changed his life. And I think of when we suffered $20 million in state aid cuts over those 2 years, we raised taxes 19% locally. And thank God our communities supported that 19, because we would have lost NJRTC. I would have lost some of the very AP courses that this kid tackled to get that full ride to MIT. And I remember hearing a story upstate New York. I always think, I'm one of the poorest school districts on Long Island. And then you go upstate and you're like, wow, you're at 0.57 with your combined wealth ratio. I'm sitting at a table with somebody 0.25. And I'll never forget a superintendent in the northern tier country of New York State saying that his valedictorian could not get accepted into a SUNY school because he didn't have a good enough high school resume. There is something radically wrong with that, where the number one kid in the class can't get to a state school because the course offerings at his high school just weren't there or resourceful enough to compete. There's something wrong with that. And that's the drive and the passion why I think we need to continue to fight with our advocacy.
Yeah. So we have a question from Mrs. Romano. Talk about how your district works with BOCES on services and developing new programs.
Yeah, we're a big district. We rely heavily on BOCES with the support services that they give us. They've been a great partner. NJRTC is just one of the examples. And we've always had a strong collaboration and sharing of ideas and students and services. So we work very well. I think due to our size, sometimes we could do things smaller districts can't. But we never lose sight of, what BOCES is all about and how it benefits our kids and our community. We wish we could do more. One of the cuts that really hurt the most was cutting our CTE programs in 08, 09, 9, 10. And, telling some of our culinary kids they couldn't go. I still get requests for the aviation program, right? And that's painful when you have to say no. You don't want to, because the value on that. But when you're losing $20 million in state aid, tough choices had to be made. Do I keep full day kindergarten or sacrifice something else? And, those were tough choices. So BOCES has always been a strong partner of ours, and we value that partnership, and we're going to make sure that continues as well.
Yeah. I've seen your in-house programs. They're good programs. I was over there a couple of years ago, and Kevin walked us through those programs. You guys did a good job.
Yeah, we brought in some of the in-house CTE programs. That was a vision of Dr. Casciano's, and again, supported the community with a capital project that helped us build automotive space, helped us build barbering, and we have a carpentry program, and we tie it with our business academy. But you guys were helping us, advise us on those programs all along. Even though it was an in-house program, you still worked with us as true partners, and that is something that we value too. And they are good programs, and the reason they're successful is because we had good role models to model what we wanted to set up, and we were all offering savings because you didn't have the transportation cost, obviously, and the kids were able to stay on campus. So there's something to be said for that. But it's definitely the CTE, which we're huge proponents of. And I'm a big fan. That's why we highlight so many of your programs on the show too. CTE is definitely one of the things that helped us get to 90%. Without it, there's no way we would have gotten to the 90% mark. And of course, we're already setting our sights for the drive for 95, as I call it. So we're not, we got to 90, and I said to Kevin, I said, congratulations, drive for 95 begins today.
No rest for the weary.
No rest for the weary. So, but again, advocacy, You got to read your community. Are they willing to make that investment in the capital infrastructure that was needed to make that happen? The operational expense, the instructional. During budget season and all during the year, as a matter of fact, I'm going to be a guest speaker at my local Chamber of Commerce on the 9th of November. I always try to talk about their return on investment. Us keeping the NJRTC program during all those cuts. Well, since the time that we've made sure that our community invested so that we could keep that one program, and I know I'm simplifying it, but that one program is also responsible for 7 young ladies receiving either Marine or U.S. Navy scholarships to go to college. And for those that don't know, those scholarships are full rides. We had them go to University of Pennsylvania. We had to go wherever. Young ladies getting these scholarships, and they're highly competitive and they're very difficult to attain. So the return on investment, I had 6 students whose families did not have to worry about top-notch college expense because of their experience in NJROTC and the fact that those instructors helped guide them along and made them competitive for those scholarships. So the return on investment on that program, huge. And also since then, we had 2 kids appointed to the academies. One young man went to the Naval Academy. He's now a fighter pilot. What's the value of an academy education? When he's done serving his country, he's going to write his own ticket. The other young lady went to the Coast Guard Academy, same thing. So and these are the stories I tell locally for the local stakeholders, because again, it's advocacy by showing them the value on the return on investment.
Good, thank you. So the president weighs in. We've got President of New York State School Boards, Fred Langstaff. If you could talk to the new commissioner, what would you say?
Well, Fred, I'm looking forward to that conversation because I know I'll get to speak to her one day. So what I would say is something that Fred's been saying for a long time, education shouldn't vary based on a zip code. We need to find a better way. I think we get tired of the annual dance, right? We seem to do the same dance with not many different results. So my ask of the commissioner would be, fight for all zip codes. Don't rob Peter to pay Paul. Raise the bar. Fight like heck with the state legislature. The commissioner, is kind of limited in what they can do, right? They don't hold the purse string. They could set the regulations and the policy, but she needs to be our strongest advocate up in Albany every day. She needs to tell that story, why it matters, why when they are not having their priorities straight on education funding and maybe bogged down in something else, why this matters. And the other thing I would stress with the commissioner to make sure she advocates for and also remembers when they're making their decisions is the importance of local control and governance. Local control and governance is something that has eroded us as board members for so many years, either through an underfunded mandate, or through other regulations that takes the decision-making process out of the hands of local boards of education. We know our communities best. We know what works. We know what doesn't work. I'll use a recent example of, I'm sure several of you have heard, after our school opened this year, we were kind of on national headlines because a young man decided not to follow our plan. And, it ratcheted up very quickly in a very unfortunate way, and that grabbed the attention in national media. But you know what? While I was getting hate email from all over the country after being on Fox News, and I was getting some really pretty vicious emails, locally at home, our community supported our decision, supported what we did, supported the model and the plan that we did, because again, we worry about the advocacy local at home, and I stress the importance of local governance and control, of being that close to the ground, and why local boards of education matter. So that would also be my other ask of the Commissioner of Education. How's that one, Fred? I can see him give him a thumbs up.
So we have time for one more question, and I'm going to ask it. In this year, when you have to believe the state has no money, does advocacy for public education look different?
No. I think the conversation, maybe the asks are different. I think as public education advocates, and those that know me know this is a big thing for me with mandate relief. I think you have to know your audience and say, okay, well, I'm not going to go in there asking for money. How about we look at the other side of the ledger? Let's look at the cost drivers that drive up the cost of education that ask me for needing more money. How about we finally peel the onion and let's look at substantial, meaningful mandate relief. So the advocacy doesn't change, the ask will change. And for the young students that have participated tonight, it's the elevator pitch. You have to know what your ask is and pretend you have about 2 minutes to make your point. So when I go up to Albany or I go down to DC, and Kathy and Fred know this well, we'll look at what the state association is asking for as far as the points we want to hammer home. But our conversation is different depending on who we're talking to. You know, we knew not to talk to Lee Zeldin about the SALT deduction. You know, we knew that. So let's talk about something else. So I think this year, yes, there's no money. That should really open the door to meaningful conversation, saying we're not looking for money, we're looking for savings, and we need your help with the savings. And we all know, Julie, you of anybody knows the impact of the unfunded and underfunded mandates, and we really have to have that conversation. And we really, I think, should take advantage of the tough economic times that the state is facing, saying we get it, we understand it, help us help you to save some money. That would be my message.
Excellent. So we thank you very much for taking time out to do this. If you were in person, we would bring you up with the students for a photo, and then we'll this lovely plaque, which we will get to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You know, so not only am I appreciative of you taking the time to do this, but really of the work that you do all year round. It's really a pleasure to do that work alongside of you. Bill, I don't know if you have any
Same here.
wrap up. Thank you. Any wrap up?
Just like to thank Robert for his participation tonight and his advocacy for our school districts and education. Our next meeting is November 12th, so I don't know if we have confirmed a speaker yet, but I know we are working on it.
All right. Well, I just want to thank all of you for listening to me for a long period of time here, and I hope I didn't put anybody to sleep. But listen, public education matters, and you know, it might be a punchline or a joke for our naysayers, but for us, it is about the kids, and that's why we do it. So, and that's why we'll continue to do it. And I'm proud to serve alongside of some great people like yourselves. So, thank you.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
You
Thanks.
too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.